I think you'd have also seen, the Gartner hype cycle, Kunal. Um,
Mhm.
it's quite a nice framework where whenever any new technology comes, there's a lot of buzz, and then there is this peak of inflated expectations. After which people, maybe overspend based on the buzz, and then there's this trough of disappointment, and then there's the slope of enlightenment where people start figuring out
Investment.
how to use this. And
Yeah.
then there is the plateau of productivity, and I'm almost waiting for the peak and the trough to be behind us before I
Mhm.
start getting onto this journey when we as an ecosystem are on that slope of enlightenment.
Hi, friends, and welcome to this exciting episode of Leading with Data. Today, I have with me Prithvi Chandrasekhar. So, Prithvi is currently the CEO of InCred Consumer Finance, but he and I go a long way back. So, when I had started my career and joined Capital One, Prithvi used to lead the team which I joined, and he became my first mentor, so to speak. And about a month after I'd spent time in Capital One, Prithvi actually took a training which was called Structured Thinking and Writing, which had a huge impact on me even at that time. And some of the recommendations he made, not only I use them in my day to day life, but that's something which I recommend very frequently. Post spending time with Capital One, Prithvi had spent time with Experian, McKinsey, and brings in immense experience of consulting, problem solving using data. I'm excited to have him here. Outside of work, Prithvi is an avid reader, so we will hopefully talk about some books, and he's deeply passionate about cricket. In fact, if you go to his LinkedIn profile, you'll see a photo of him and Rahul Dravid on a stage. So, really excited to have you, Prithvi, on the show. And thanks for taking time off.
Thanks for having me, Kunal. Looking forward to this, both reliving our very happy times together at Capital One and helping the people on your platform however I can. Thanks for having me.
Great. So, Prithvi, let me start with your journey and how you got into data analytics and Capital One. So, what were early days like you, and how did you get into analytics? And irrespective of whether it was a term at that time or not.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I got into it long before there was a word like analytics or there were terms like data science. So I actually got into a similar field uh, well before I joined Capital One. My first job was actually at Procter and Gamble India, and
Mhm.
I joined it partly out of family encouragement. Right, my father had started his career at Unilever. A couple of my uncles had started their careers at Unilever. My grandfather spent his entire lifetime with the Tata Group, uh, as did another of my uncles who was a TAS officer. So there were lots of my elders in the family who'd spent their careers working for very big, proud organizations, corporations, right? And there was a lot of encouragement for me to follow suit. I wasn't sure, but I did follow suit and
Mhm.
started my career in the corporate world, actually as a summer intern at Procter and Gamble India. Uh, I loved the work, right? And what I loved about the work was something which today we would call analytics. At
Mhm.
that time, there was no big data. It was really data that came from surveys. Uh,
Yeah.
but what I loved about the work was the way in which the big picture thinking that you needed to run a business about the market landscape, competition, consumer behavior, how all of that big picture thinking uh, could then be addressed more effectively and very powerfully with rigorous analysis of both quantitative and sometimes qualitative data, right? And I
Mhm.
really loved that. It actually gave me conviction that this was work this was work worth doing, right? That this was
Mhm.
substantive work, that this was impactful work, that it was interesting work. It wasn't bullshit. And yeah, that was how I started. I then went on from there to consulting. One aspect of my job that I really enjoyed was the big picture thinking about the market opportunity, the landscape, the competition mapping, understanding consumer behavior, understanding how the P&L was driven. And there are lots of opportunities to do that in management consulting as a business. And from my very first years at P&G, I went into a much more substantial stint at Accenture Strategy, as it's called now, uh,
Mhm.
which I thoroughly enjoyed. Uh, I then went from there to Capital One. At that time, Capital One was called an analytics company. The credit cards were
Yeah.
incidental. It was essentially a
Right.
sandbox in which you could demonstrate the power of your analytics by creating
Mhm.
a very profitable business by
Yeah.
mining the gold mine in your data warehouse, which was the phrase we used then. And I was actually referred to Capital One by a friend, T.S. Anil. I
Mhm.
don't know if you remember the name.
Yeah,
There were
I do.
many other friends who joined Capital One at that time as well, who were already my friends before I became a part of Capital One. And as much as Capital One was a professional environment, it was also a wonderful personal environment. Many of those people I shared Capital One with, like yourself, have remained friends over the years. Right.
Yeah.
So
That's
I went to Capital One from there. I moved on from Capital One after a very, very happy time to essentially preach the gospel according to Capital One to a bigger world.
yeah.
How to do analytics, how to create a great business by discovering the gold mine in your data warehouse. That was how I thought about my second consulting stint, particularly at McKinsey.
Mhm.
And then I joined InCred to not preach but practice, right?
Much
And
better.
our
Yeah.
group founder and CEO, right, who is Bhupi Singh, who at that time was in the process of founding InCred. He hired me to InCred, and his pitch was this is your chance to create a company here at home in India, which is as great as Capital One. Right then, I found it
Yeah.
resonant then, almost 7, 8 years ago when I joined, and I still find it
Mhm.
resonant now. So
Yeah.
that's really been my journey. I mean, I've spent a big chunk of time in management consulting in Accenture Strategy and in McKinsey, uh, as well as a big chunk of time in consumer finance, really using analytics to make better decisions in both Capital
Yeah.
One and now in InCred.
Great. Great. Thanks for sharing that, Prithvi. So, Prithvi, when you decided to join InCred, at that time you were in UK and then you moved to India. So, was that a personal decision for you, or InCred happened and you wanted to build something from scratch? So what was the story of you coming back from UK to India?
In the UK, yeah. Actually, Kunal, the return to India motivation uh, came first. So
Mm-hmm.
me and my wife fortunately saw eye to eye on this, which is we both wanted to come back to India for purely
Mm-hmm.
personal, purely sentimental reasons. We could have, lived a very happy life in a different country. The UK and the US are really, you know, familiar ground, right? We've lived there for a long time. A lot of
Yeah.
friends are there, right? But we both wanted to come back home as we still thought of India. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
our parents were getting older, our children were getting older.
Mhm.
And the longer you stay abroad, the harder it is to come back. It started off
Right.
as, let's try life abroad for 3 years, and then three
Mhm.
years became 6, and 6 years became 9, and ultimately I lived abroad for almost 14 years, which is a
Right.
banvas, right? So we wanted
It
to come
is.
back, right? We
Mhm.
wanted to come back. We had a wonderful time in our years abroad,
Mhm.
and it was almost a promise we made ourselves, both of us,
Right.
and
Mhm.
by grace of God, we were able to keep it. And
Mhm.
InCred was in a way a big commitment, because with an international company like a McKinsey or maybe even an Accenture, you could come
Yeah.
to India, try stuff out. If it doesn't work, go back to another country. Whereas InCred is an India-facing business, so we had
Yeah.
to commit. And I actually think it's worked out well now with 2020 hindsight, because
Mhm.
psychologically we committed to India, right? And
Right.
I think
Mhm.
uh, that made it, much easier to take the troughs that come with the highs.
Interesting. And would love to double click on the InCred journey because when you joined, you were like 20 people to, how big are the operations today? How big is InCred and how has been that journey?
Yeah, it's on the one hand been a, I want to say long, but long and very successful journey. I mean, it's we started in 2016. I joined
Yeah.
InCred when Boopy and a core group of investors had raised money, but before we
Hmm.
actually started any operations. Uh,
Right.
and for an NBFC like us, that means before we'd actually given out any loans,
Hmm.
before we had any customers or any book as such. Uh, Today, about an 8,500 crore NBFC, and the
Hmm.
NBFC is one part of a bigger InCred group, which
Yeah.
includes our investment banking division and InCred Capital, and a wealth management division and InCred Wealth. Uh,
Hmm.
Across the group, we're about 1,500 to 2,000 people now. Just the NBFC is, I mean, it's the most manpower intensive part of the group, but
Yeah.
that's about 1,400 people.
Hmm.
So it's a big company now. It's no longer a small startup. I'm
Right.
saying that with a little bit of hesitation, because when I put it that way, it sounds like we've arrived. That's totally not how we see it. The way we see it, we're still just getting started. Right?
Right.
Uh,
Hmm.
I mean, all of our planning is about, we're now in 8,000 crore book. What do we look
Hmm.
like at 16,000 crores? What do we look like at 25,000 crores? And all of our
Hmm.
day-to-day work, I'm just coming out of a meeting with our CTO, is about
Right.
uh, building to make that possible. So at
Hmm.
some level, we are still very young. We're still getting started. But
Yeah.
I'm delighted with the distance we've covered in these years. Right? And
Hmm.
two of these were COVID years. So in about
Right.
5 to 6 real years,
Hmm.
it's been a fantastic journey.
Yeah. And when you started building InCred, right? As you rightly said that the thought was to build a Capital One like company out of India, uh, and that is obviously at several levels. So talent, culture. So when you thought about that Capital One-esque company based out of India, what were some of the key things, and then how you've gone about building that in this journey?
You're right, there's a lot of different aspects to it. But let me pick
Mhm.
out two that I really care about, which I
Yeah.
loved in our time, Kunal, at Capital One, as
Mhm.
well as something that I think we're doing very well at creating here at InCred. And the two are, it's a great place to work,
Mhm.
and we're very committed to intellectual rigor, right? What in
Right.
Capital One, Peter Schnall, our then Chief Credit Officer, called
Yeah.
truth seeking, right?
Yeah.
Being true to the evidence, true to your mission, right? uh, finding
Yeah.
out what's really going on rather than getting distracted by the spin and the storytelling. Right.
Yeah.
So I think you'd recall when we were in the UK, Capital One won awards for best place to work in the country 3
Right.
years in a row, right?
Yeah.
And we were so proud of it. I was personally very proud of it
Yeah. That
because
is
it
true.
didn't happen by itself. We put in a real effort into
Yeah.
making it a great place to work, right?
Hmm.
And we won that award not in our industry or in our category of companies, but in the country, right?
Right.
In one
Yeah.
of the world's biggest and most sophisticated economies. I mean, then and even now.
Yeah.
And that's something to be proud of. And
Hmm.
I'm very glad that we're staying true to that idealism here at InCred as well. Right?
Hmm.
Uh, we're a more complex company than Capital One, actually. We're a much more multi product company. But
Hmm.
despite that complexity, we really make an effort to make this a great place to work. Right? Uh, treating people well,
Hmm.
hiring the best, right? Making an effort to give people room to mature, to flower, to express themselves within the
Hmm.
scope of obviously their day job. Uh,
Yeah.
and being a growing company, one of the nice things is that you can offer people the opportunity for personal growth as well. So that's something I
Right.
really like about you know InCred that I think was also true of the heydays of Capital One. Right?
That is true.
The
That is
second
true.
thing is a term that my Capital One friends all know totally, right? Because we so internalized it. But it's a very
Yeah.
old phrase. It's what Peter Schnarr called truth seeking, which essentially means stay true to the data, straight true to the evidence, persist, keep digging till you get to the nub of what's really going on. And therefore, what are the few key moves you need to make to get to where you want to? Right? And when I say that, it sounds obvious. I mean, why would you not do that?
Yeah.
Right? Uh, except that, I mean, we all know that in real
Doesn't
life,
happen.
it's very
Yeah.
difficult to do that. Right? We
That is
have our
true.
own biases, we have our own agendas, hidden or subconscious or otherwise. Different parts of the organization have their own agendas. The limitations in the data that you see, the data is never unambiguous. And so
Yeah.
being a truth seeker is actually not that easy. In a way, we
True.
have an advantage now that, I mean, there's so much more data, there's so much more
Yeah.
tech than there was 15, 20 years ago that
Hmm.
it is a little bit easier to be objective, but it's never easy.
True.
I mean, look at all the companies that are struggling to, uh, get value from the data, not because the data is
Correct.
flawed, but because the way the company works doesn't actually support what the data supports, right? And
Correct.
it's nobody's fault. I mean, that's the way the world works. And so I
Hmm.
really make an effort to promote truth seeking or intellectual honesty, is another way of putting it.
Hmm.
I think that more than the sophistication of the models that we build is what I took away from our time at Capital One. Right? The models are more sophisticated now. There's a lot more computing power available. There's a lot more data available. Uh, the tech to do A/B testing or DOE is a lot more advanced. So yeah, a lot of these things have really become very, very much better than it was in those days. But that
Hmm.
spirit of truth seeking, of intellectual integrity, is something I really value and try and bring to life here at InCred as well.
Interesting. And how does that translate to, let's say, day-to-day decisions, culture, org structure? So to implement this vision, what are some of the, calls you've taken, let's say, at a org level and culture level to institutionalize this?
Again, it's a tough question. There are lots of layers to that answer.
Right.
Let me
Mm-hmm.
again pick out two, three key points.
Yeah.
Uh, First is uh, set the example from right at the top of the house. Uh,
Yeah.
I try and set the example in terms of being a truth seeker, in terms of being intellectually
Mm-hmm.
honest, in terms of getting to the real bottom of the problem, rather than
Mm-hmm.
coming up with a hand wavy half answer, which is very easy to do, right? And
Yeah.
uh, Boopy loves it too. He doesn't just support it;
Mm-hmm.
he loves it, and
Mm-hmm.
he's our primary, you know, he's our group founder. So it
Right.
matters that he supports it, that I do it. Uh, there's a handful of key people that I have around me whom I picked uh,
Mm-hmm.
and whom I supported and developed over the years because they
Mm-hmm.
respect this culture and get it. They get what it
Yeah.
means. And conversely, when I find people, particularly in job families like analytics and tech product, uh, aren't getting the value of intellectual honesty and are descending into spin, I try and move
Mm-hmm.
them into either jobs where it doesn't matter or out of the organization. Right? So
Yeah.
first is set the example. Second is
Mm-hmm.
find people who support you in doing that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Third, make two more points. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Third is be nuanced about when you make decisions based on the hard numbers and when you make pragmatic decisions or managerial decisions based on what you're finding subjectively when you go out into field into reality. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I actually think this is a slightly nuanced point, but
Yeah.
uh, I think for example, in the algorithmic part of our risk process, really all
Mm-hmm.
the decisions are made by a small group of skilled people based
Mm-hmm.
on hard evidence. Right? But
Right.
the strategy, the broader business strategy that policy is a part of, would fail if we did not come up with pragmatic answers to how we manage our distribution partners, how we manage our
Right.
collections agencies, or how we manage our telesales vendors. And I actually
Mm-hmm.
think I'm supporting the agenda of truth seeking by being pragmatic
Yeah.
and and sticking up for the pure answer where it is genuinely pure and it matters, and being
Right.
pragmatic and doing what works, where
Mm-hmm.
maybe a purely analytical answer isn't available, right? And the fourth thing, Kunal, that I think is actually important is another odd word like truth seeking in Capital One.
Mm-hmm.
One of our values at InCred is winning, right?
Okay.
And
Mm-hmm.
nothing succeeds like success, right?
Right.
If
Mm-hmm.
you, I mean, if we are now, about 7.5, 8 years into the journey, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Now that we stay true to rigorous analytics and algorithmic decision making, combined with a measure of pragmatism in terms of what can really get done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're now a unicorn, and we're now still growing, uh, still building out a much bigger and more successful company. For us to say
Mm-hmm.
this is the way we do things here, right, and bring the next generation into this way of thinking is actually a lot easier.
Right.
So
That
yeah,
is
to build that culture now is a lot easier than it was in say 2016, 17, 18,
true.
when it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't really obvious that that this would work. You'd get
Yeah.
questions like, all of that is fine, but is it relevant in India? Of course, it's relevant in India, and I think the relevant point is there are some aspects of your answer which won't come out of the data. Respect that
Right.
and come up with good pragmatic answers there. Right?
True. In fact, on that point, a couple of follow-up questions. Uh, The first one is, usually when companies start, companies like your NBFCs, they would focus on monoline. That was Capital One journey as well, right? So largely started and focused on cards. But you did this differently, right? So what was the hypothesis, and then what was the thought to kind of have multiple offerings from the start? Because it's a lot more difficult to execute.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, right now that we're 5,000 crore, 1,500 plus people company, sorry, 8,000 crore, 1,500 people
8,000.
plus company, the benefits of being a diversified business are obvious.
Right.
In 2017, before we had written our first loan, it was
Yeah.
not obvious.
Hmm.
Uh, and what gave us the conviction to build a diversified business then was the confidence that we would get to where we are now, right?
Yeah.
We were, I mean, to use a Stephen Covey phrase, begin with the end in mind. We knew that
Right.
when we were grown ups, we would be a diversified business. And
Hmm.
rather than start as a monoline and then diversify, which is what, of course, Capital One did, right?
Yeah.
We said, let's build out, let's put down all the rails that we will have operational even when we're grown ups.
Hmm.
So we were essentially building for a uh, for a ambitious end state with a lot of
Hmm.
confidence that we would get there.
Interesting.
Was it easy? No, it was not. Right,
Yeah.
and the vision was we were very sure of the vision that it would be
Hmm.
better in the long term. And to your word, execution, right? That is vital. It did make
Yeah.
execution a lot harder. So
Right.
it did make it harder, and we've got battle scars to prove it that we did
Yeah.
fight to execute and got through that fight. And I think
Hmm.
the stability of this company now is testament to that was the right way to go.
Right.
And if I look back, Kunal, on all the adventures we've had in India, right?
Hmm.
Demonetization, GST implementation, ILFS crisis,
Yeah.
DHFL crisis, COVID 1, COVID 2, Supreme Court ruling on Aadhaar, DLG
Right.
guidelines, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is India. A lot of things happen,
It is
right?
correct.
And you want to be resilient to the shocks that this environment will throw your way anyhow, right?
Yeah.
And the diversification gives you resilience.
True, true. And the second point was actually related to that, right? Because although this is now almost 2, 3 decades earlier, when Capital One came, they saw that the market was not ready because of to their style of doing business, right? Because of data reasons and multiple other things. To when you decided to do this in 2016. Uh, were you sure that the market is ready, or did you kind of test it out and then kind of built on that idea? So how was your approach, and then what were the thoughts at that
I learned to do this business at Capital One. So obviously, I did a test and learn.
time?
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
So
I
true. Yeah.
obviously believed before I joined, right?
Right.
Because that belief has to come from
Inside. Yeah.
come from within before you have done your test and learn. But
Correct.
if I look back on the first 2 years of even my business in consumer finance, we were
Hmm.
running at very low volumes, essentially uh, making our algo based decision making suite and the tech suite that supports it stable and then robust and tested and then optimized before we started putting on the volumes when we are very sure that it's going to work well. So
Hmm.
yeah, I did believe in 2016 when I signed up with Boopy that the infra in India is now ready for the the Capital One style of working, which is a data-centric, algo-based decision-making approach. We were certainly not alone. I mean, as you know, there are lots of
Yeah.
fintechs and other innovators who came in at that time. And
Yeah.
I think, I mean, we've both lived through it now. I mean, I would say that the quality of data that we now have in India, and therefore the quality of the decision making we can do with that data, is
Yeah.
better than most parts of the Western world. Right? Uh, it's not only UPI or Aadhaar, right? It's our credit bureaus are very good, partly because they're new.
Right.
The account aggregator framework we have is very good. I mean, when I talk to friends in Europe, including the UK, open banking is a big deal. We've been
Yeah.
doing it for 7 or 8 years at least. Right?
True.
The Natch infrastructure for payments is not as good as UPI, but it's pretty good. The video KYC infrastructure, again, thanks to Aadhaar, is good,
Yeah.
right? The regulators, both in the RBI and in associated, authorities like the finance ministry, have been promoting innovation, right? They do
Yeah.
have nervous moments when they worry if the innovators are, spoiling the entire system, as they should. But the environment has been very, very supportive to the kind of innovation we've been doing. And of
Yeah.
course, India's been on a pretty good macro, I mean, which shocks as is inevitable. But the India story has been playing out. So, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, when Capital One first considered India as a destination market in the late 90s, none of this infra was there. Aadhaar,
Right.
UPI, credit bureaus, account aggregator, video KYC, mobile telephony, none of this was there, right? And all of this is now there to a point where we take it for granted. So, yes, I do think there's a reason why we are doing this well now,
Mhm.
in a way that nobody really could have in 99 or even 2005.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, it's changing gears a bit, Prithvi. So one of the things which has fascinated and has got a lot of momentum in the last 1.5 years is generative AI and its usage, right? So the technology coming into force by Chat GPT making a public release and then all the attention which is getting. Uh, what is your view on generative AI, its adoption and its usage on business? And are there any initiatives you are doing internally to adopt that?
So, Kunal, the last part of your question is the easiest to answer, which is no. Right?
Okay.
So, in my day job is, the CEO of our consumer finance business, I'm not
Mhm.
sponsoring any initiatives to adopt Gen AI. Right?
Okay.
That doesn't mean I don't believe in LLMs or Gen AI or that entire class of analytics. Uh,
Mhm.
I think you know the theory, which is with any transformative technology, people tend to overestimate its impact in the short term, but underestimate its impact in the long term, right? And
Mhm.
that's true of mobile telephony, of the internet, computing itself. I mean, famously, Tom Watson thought there was a market size of 50 IBM computers,
Yeah.
right? And going back, the internal combustion engine, electricity. In the short term, people tend to underestimate or to overestimate the impact. And sorry, and in the long term, the impact is bigger, right?
Yeah.
So, in a 3 to 5 year planning cycle, I don't expect Gen AI to change our business that much. We will be
Mhm.
looking around, talking to people, and figuring out if there are things we should be doing at a low cost, maybe
Mhm.
flying a few kites to see what works. But in a
Mhm.
3 to 5 year time frame, I don't think it will transform our business. In a
Mhm.
20 to 30 year time frame, it probably will transform not just our business, but many businesses which
Everything.
are proximate to ours. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think in the short term, I'm not planning to sponsor any big initiatives, certainly any expensive initiatives related to Gen AI. Right? I think you'd have also seen, the Gartner hype cycle, Kunal. Um,
Hmm.
it's quite a nice framework where whenever any new technology comes, there's a lot of buzz, and then there is this peak of inflated expectations. After which people, maybe overspend based on the buzz, and then there's this trough of disappointment, and then there's the slope of enlightenment where people start figuring out
Investment.
how to use this, and
Yeah.
then there is the plateau of productivity, and I'm almost waiting for the peak and the trough to be behind us before I
Hmm.
start getting onto this journey when we as an ecosystem are on that slope of enlightenment.
Hmm. Interesting, very interesting. And do you feel that the pace of these Gartner cycles have changed over time? So do you expect the same time frame in which, let's say, the generative AI cycle goes through, or the duration could be different? What is your thoughts on that?
I think there is a lot of talk about technology cycles are accelerating, but
Hmm.
if I look at not just the technology development but the adoption at a commercial
Yeah.
scale, uh, my own view is not much, right? Uh,
Hmm.
what do I mean by that? I mean, uh, we've seen major technologies like the internet or mobile telephony come along, right, and change
Yeah.
the world. But they've taken maybe 15 years to really embed and find use cases and find uh, businesses that adopt them and then set the tone, and then the uh, laggards start adopting them as well. So I mean, my own observation, I haven't studied it scientifically, but my own observation is that it takes 15 plus years for a major technology to really
Hmm.
reach a scale where it's commercially impactful, right? uh, I haven't observed it getting faster. I think that might be true in
Hmm.
the actual tech side, right?
Sure.
Maybe Moore's law is even faster now than it was in Moore's time, right?
Right.
But in terms of adoption, which is also about people changing their behaviors, businesses changing their processes, I think that takes time.
Sure. Mhm. Uh, and Prithvi, you have now spent, I think, close to 25 years. You've seen analytics, from a non-existent word to gaining momentum, data science keyword being used, and now AI. If, let's say, someone is starting their career or are in middle of their career, what would be your advice to them in terms of how should they think, let's say, about the next 5, 10 years, or how should they shape their career?
So, Kunal, the thought I'll share is something I actually shared uh, with a youngster I care a lot about, my daughter's roommate.
Hmm.
And she is in her final year at college and was asking me about what I do and asked me for advice about careers in consulting or finance.
Hmm.
And there were two thoughts I gave her, which I think are generally applicable. First
Hmm.
is your career will be 45 years, and with lifespans increasing, they might well be over 50 years now, right? And in that time, you will have many mini careers within that big canvas, right? And in those many mini careers, one thing you will need is T-shaped skills, right? So you will need skills that allow you to connect with people who are different from you, who see the world different from you, who have their own agendas. You need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to lead. You need to be thinking through unstructured problems, understand context. All of these things you need to do on the horizontal bar of the T. You will
Mhm.
also need one and maybe even two or three areas where you're deep, where
Yeah.
you know a lot, where you have a lot of content to offer.
Mhm.
And over your career, you will need to develop both, both
Mhm.
the horizontal part of the T and the vertical part of the T.
Mhm.
Uh, which one you want to develop now, I think, depends on who you are and where you are. Right?
Mhm.
For somebody just starting off his or her career, I would say do what you enjoy doing more. Right? So, like the girl I'm talking about, Lekia, she's
Mhm.
very extroverted, very energetic, loves meeting new people, is interested in absolutely everything, right? And she's a very natural fit for the horizontal part of the team. Right?
Mhm.
So I was like, start your career on a high, go do things you enjoy, do things that
Yeah.
get you started on that axis, right?
Mhm.
Uh, for somebody who's mid-career, say 10 years in, if you've spent the first 10 years of your career on the vertical axis, as say a hardcore tech engineer, say work on the horizontal and
Yeah.
learn to lead, learn public speaking, learn about the context. And if you've
Mhm.
say spent 10 years in say management consulting, I would say learn about a particular industry or a particular domain or a particular uh, you know uh, technique, like say analytics, where you can differentiate yourself and really build a name for yourself, right? So complete the T when you're 10 years in, right? So by the
Mhm.
time you get to the second half of the career of your career, you're the finished product, and you've got the stamina after having started your career doing something you love to last that entire distance of 45, 50 years.
Very
So
interesting.
that's how I think about it. In fact,
Mhm.
I mean, I was talking about my daughter's roommate Alekia, who wants to start, I think, should start on the horizontal part of the team. Our
Mhm.
common friend Kunal Michael Woodburn, his son Teddy,
Mhm.
he's a hardcore tech guy, and he's least interested in history or economics or politics or psychology. He's doing aeronautical engineering and wants to build planes and rockets, and that's all he wants to do. So I'm like, that's
Right.
great. That's what you love. Go out there and do it. Right?
Yeah.
And
True.
your Woodburn son, I'm sure you can, communicate and lead. Like, find the right
True.
time in your career to do that, right? Right now,
Yeah.
enjoy yourself. Right?
Mhm.
So that's
That's good.
kind of how I think about it.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And obviously you read a lot, and some of the, as I mentioned at the start, books which you recommended had a great impact on me. In fact, still when someone asks me about structured thinking, the pyramid principle is one of the first book which I recommend. So, would love to hear your thoughts on it. That what are some of the books which have had a great impact on you, and which you would recommend people to read and learn from.
So you've already mentioned the pyramid principle, which I taught for many years, and I actually
Right.
benefited from it as well. So I won't get into that. And if I had to pick one book, I'll pick actually what remains to date my favorite book.
Mhm.
I read it like in a week in my first year in college, in St. Stephen's College, when I should
Okay.
probably have been doing other things, but I loved it so much I read it in a week. It's called Zen in
Mhm.
the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And it's
Right.
a book I go to for motivation even now, right?
Mhm.
I sometimes tell myself I'm doing Zen in the art of credit risk management when I'm actually getting into the weeds of our credit policy and analytics in our business. It's about
Mhm.
how there isn't really a contradiction between the arts and the sciences, and about how you can find beauty and meaning in science exactly like you can find rigor and discipline in the arts. And that was the
Yeah,
thought behind Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's beautifully written. It's a 60s book, but I think it's still current. That's something I'd recommend. It's not career oriented at all. Uh,
yeah,
if there's something more career oriented that your target audience might benefit from, Kunal, I've got a couple. Just give me a minute.
sure. Mhm.
So, this is something I'm sure your analytics Vidhya people know about. Very good book,
Yeah.
good place to start. We use
Mhm.
it at InCred as well to onboard engineers, say, who are joining our analytics team in terms of
Mhm.
yeah, how to do the, analytics 101 bit.
Right.
Um, Another book, which is a general interest book, but I think is actually very important. Uh, Actually, maybe even more at my level, because it's about understanding the limits of analytics, right?
Mhm.
Tool by randomness, and I actually like
Yeah.
most things that Nassim Taleb has written. Might
Mhm.
disagree with some of the points, but most of them are still good points. And I think fooled by randomness, so the role of chance uh, is, and the limitations of the data that you're analyzing are actually very important things for us in the analytics profession to always be aware of and consider and obsess about. Uh,
Yeah.
Another good book by Taleb, which I generally recommend, is Skin in the Game. Right.
Yeah.
In terms of again time management, which is early on in somebody's career, often, frankly, even now in my career, is
Mhm.
one of those things you're always getting better at. I like this book a lot. Deep Work, Cal Newport. Cal
Yeah.
Newport is also a blogger like Taleb, and I follow his blog, read most things
Mhm.
he's written. And I actually really like the idea of deep work. Uh,
Right.
in fact, he makes this point saying maybe I need it as an academic and maybe CEOs don't need it. I'm actually a practicing CEO and I find I'm better
Yeah.
because I make the time for deep work. So I actually
Right.
understand our product market, our customer profile, our uh, risk policy, our marketing funnels in
Yeah.
considerable depth and not at a superficial level. And I think I'm able to function more effectively because of that. And if
True.
I didn't create time for deep work, I wouldn't be able to do that.
Mhm.
So those are some books I found helpful. In fact, there's something we started in our analytics team during COVID for new
Okay.
hires. Again, something I picked from Michael Woodburn at Capital One, which is The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People,
Yeah.
Stephen Covey. I was actually trained on that in the 1990s in my PNG time.
Yeah, that is
And it's a tool
true.
that's fashionable, but I think it's actually good advice.
No, it is. It is. In fact, it was the first book my parents gave to me as well. That you should be reading this book, and this was when I was just coming out of school. So, so yeah, it has been there, but still very relevant. Things like circle of competence, and then some of the things which are there are a gold mine.
Yeah, and these are eternal ideas, right? I mean, I think Stephen Covey is the first to admit he did not come up with any of them. They're not original. But he's
Yeah.
packaged them well. And if you're not already familiar with them, they're useful. And the whole
Correct.
idea is to make them habits that you live by, right?
Mhm.
And I think, particularly for people who are early on in their careers, it can be transformative.
True. True.
So those are a few.
Coming.
Those are a few that
Yeah.
that I like. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a long list, right? I'm not
Beautiful.
talking about Rushdie and Marquez because that's a very different kind of.
No, great. The last thing which I would love to touch upon is cricket and then your passion for it. And I think the most obvious question is with IPL around the corner, are you going for the first match?
Uh, I have not made plans to go for the first match, but I'm still more excited about the Test cricket than about IPL.
That is
I
true.
think this India England Test series, which is going on, has been fantastic.
Phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah, to me, that's still the real deal. I enjoy IPL cricket. I'm not, a
Mhm.
purist who dismisses it. I'm a CSK fan,
Yeah.
and I will be, in fact, trying to attend a few CSK games at a minimum.
Mhm.
But yeah, I really enjoy a lot of Test cricket, and I'm following what Basball has done for Test cricket, which I think is great. And I'm
Yeah.
glad India beat Basball, but it was a contest, right?
It was.
So yeah,
It
I
was.
continue to follow cricket as closely as I ever did.
That is true. That is true. And
So in
in your
fact,
interactions with, no, no,
yeah,
please go ahead.
go ahead, Kunal.
Yeah, I was just
So I
going to
was
ask
actually
in
going
your
to quote
interactions
Satya
with.
Nadella, right? I heard a podcast.
Hmm.
I think it was
Hmm.
Adam Grant's podcast where he was interviewing Satya Nadella, and he
Hmm.
was talking about where he learned about leadership. And
Yeah.
Satya Nadella credited cricket uh, with uh, with everything that he's ever learned about leadership. He learned on the cricket field, which I think is high praise. Right, what he's
It
achieved is
is.
fantastic. But I don't think it's misplaced. I think there is a lot that even I have learned from cricket, and
Mhm.
that's part of the reason I continue to enjoy it. I no longer play it as much as I would like to. It's a very
Mhm.
time-consuming game, but yeah, I certainly enjoy it and follow it avidly still.
Mhm. And your interactions with Rahul Dravid, who is also your brand ambassador, and then of course the coach of our national team. What are some of the things about him which have left an impression on you, and then how's been those interactions for you?
Uh, Two thoughts, Kunal. I mean, there's a lot I
Mhm.
can talk about. I can talk about it for hours, but two thoughts.
Yeah,
First is what everybody knows, which is what a nice guy he is, how grounded he is, how thoughtful he is, uh, how professional he is with keeping his commitments,
yeah,
with representing our brand. Uh, all of that is true and exceptional, and we're very proud to have him as a part of our InCred team. The second was maybe more surprising. I didn't expect this when I started interacting with him. Uh,
hmm,
but he is really interested in understanding what we do, right? I was
okay,
expecting our interaction with him to be largely one-way street in terms of communication, right?
hmm,
Where we ask him about his glorious years playing for India and entering the Hall of Fame, and now the Indian national coach. He's captained
yeah,
India, one of the most storied cricketers the world has seen.
right.
And we thought he would be all about telling us about his glorious lives. No, he is interested in Prithvi. How do you figure out if a new to credit customer is a good or a bad risk? I'm like,
Wow.
cool, I can talk about that, right? But Rahul Dravid is interested. And what do you think
Wow.
will happen to your risk strategy if data access through the Google app is reduced, right? Which is, of
Mhm.
course, something I think about a lot in my day to day work, but is not what I'm expecting to discuss with a cricket star.
Cricket star.
Uh,
Wow.
but I think the wonderful thing about Dravid is he's a very cultured guy, and he's very
Mhm.
interested in the broader world around him. Of course, he knows a lot about cricket. He's lived it for most of his life. But what I think is a lovely thing about him that I take away as well in terms of, I think, learnings for all of us is to
Mhm.
be interested in a bigger, broader world than your, you know, immediate remit, right? And I think that interest in a bigger, broader world automatically means you're aware of great people doing great things in other spheres, which are not similar to yours, which I think
That,
is a wonderful perspective to have. Right?
that's
It
true.
particularly struck me as interesting because with many celebrities, right, sports people, movie stars, etc., the interactions are a little dull because you hear stories about them that you already know, right,
Mhm.
but that are on
Mhm.
playing on a loop, right?
Right.
But what was fascinating about Dravid is that he got everybody around him to talk about themselves and their work and their lives. And the people around him, including me, Saurabh, and many of our colleagues, we came out of that interaction feeling 9 feet tall because India's captain is interested in us and our lives, right? Which I think is phenomenal leadership by him.
Yeah, no, that is quite remarkable and something to learn by. Great, great. Thanks a lot, Prithvi, for taking this time out and sharing those pearls of wisdom. I think, as usual, I think tons to take away and learn from it. So thanks for taking this time out and sharing this with the community. Thank you.
My pleasure, Kunal. Very happy to connect. Very happy to bring back memories of good old days at Capital One and share what we're doing at InCred. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you. Thanks, Prithvi.